Mr. President, as I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601, and for other related matters, be now read a second time. Mr. President, this bill is 11 clauses long and offers amendments to several sections of the Firearms Act. These include to permit prison officers to carry firearms while off duty where the Commissioner of Prisons consider that the life or safety of the prison officer is under severe threat or threat. To introduce a firearm user identification card for use by holders of a firearm user's license, to allow municipal police officers to carry and possess certain non-lethal devices, to permit the Director of the Strategic Services Agency and any employee of that agency, hereafter to be referred to as SSA, as designated by the Director, to carry government-issued firearms and/or ammunition during the course and performance of their duties, to expand the list of persons who are exempt from liability for being in possession of a firearm or ammunition in a public place, to hold liable municipal police officers, the Director of the SSA, and any employees designated by the Director for offenses in relation to selling or transferring and purchasing or acquiring a firearm or ammunition to any unauthorized person. And finally, of that critical 7, is to vest in the Minister of National Security the power to extend the validity of a firearm user's license beyond the 3-year period stipulated in Section 17(6) of the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601. Mr. President, the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the public at large are in no doubt well aware of the fact that crime presents a serious challenge to the economy, our social living, all aspects of life of this republic. We face it on a daily basis, and the public records are replete with diverse cases of same. Criminals not only target law-abiding citizens of this country with the most heinous acts known to society, but they seem to do so without a blink, without thinking twice. The most recent example, and all of them qualify, most of them, but the most recent is where 2 citizens of our republic lost their young lives on account of an alleged $200 difference between 2 parties. It is no secret that the targets of the criminals' pursuits are not limited to the ordinary citizen, but also extend to law enforcement officials, including police officers, municipal police officers, and in recent times, a matter to which this particular bill is focused, prison officers, some of whom have unfortunately been mercilessly gunned down by these criminal elements. Our law enforcement officers risk their lives to protect us, all of us as citizens, our properties, the country at large, the investors' property in Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, this government, Mr. President, recognizing that it is our duty under the Constitution, morally, legally, and in every wise. It is our duty to make laws to protect the peace, order, and good governance of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. President. And it is incumbent on us, we consider, to effect laws which can afford such officers protection against these horrendous and menacing criminal elements. Notably, Mr. President, in Trinidad and Tobago, there is no inherent or constitutional right for any person to carry a firearm, and this is in contradiction to other jurisdictions where that is part of their constitutional arrangement. That's not the case in Trinidad and Tobago. Notwithstanding that, thousands of persons, many persons are permitted to carry firearms, allowed to purchase them, to acquire them, and to have them in their possession, but only if he or she holds the requisite license prescribed by the statute of the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601. The Firearms Act does, however, set out the specific persons who are allowed to be in possession of a firearm without a license, Mr. President, since the use of the firearm can be regarded as integral to the performance of such persons' duties and can offer protection should the need arise. As you know, Mr. President, situations can arise which can illustrate that the provisions of the Act may not be wide enough to protect certain persons in circumstances where lives may be at risk as a direct consequence of their jobs. Hence, the need arises to make urgent amendments to our laws in an effort to control crime and criminality and, of course, to save lives. One of the critical aims of this bill, therefore, Mr. President, is to provide a mechanism to afford statutory protection to certain officers by allowing them to have in their possession government-issued firearms and ammunition at specific times when there exists an imminent threat for their safety and the lives of others. Allow me, Mr. President, to expand on this point before I speak to any other matters which this bill seeks to address. There is the well-known, fairly recent case of Vishal Singh. And arising out of that, the need for further amendment to this legislation became very obvious, very apparent, after a ruling of the High Court in the matter Vishal Singh against the Commissioner of Prisons. The claimant, Mr. Vishal Singh, is a police officer who on August the 10th, 2015, was shot and injured by a prison officer during the course of exercising his, police officer Singh's, duty when he responded to a call pertaining to an individual being in possession of arms and ammunition in the Guayco area in East Trinidad. The prison officer also filed a claim against Mr. Singh and the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, claiming damages for assault and battery arising out of this shooting incident. In his affidavit, in support of his defense, the Commissioner of Prisons stated that at the material time, the prison officer was issued with a 9mm pistol to, and I quote, keep and carry, in his capacity as a prison officer in 2015 because of an imminent threat that existed upon the prison officer's life. The crux of the matter before the court, Mr. President, was the validity of the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service Firearms Policy, which stated that the Commissioner of Prisons had the power under Section 7, subsection 1 of the Firearms Act to issue firearms and or ammunition to prison officers who who were either constructively on duty by operation of law or deemed to be on duty and acting in the capacity as a prison officer. Part of the policy outlined the establishment of a prison threat assessment committee set up by the Commissioner of Prisons to determine the authenticity of the threats made against prison officers. So a committee was established and is established, and it is that committee that studies the threat against the prison officer, makes a determination as to whether it is sufficiently severe or otherwise, issues that report to the prison commissioner, and the prison commissioner, largely on the basis of that, would decide on the course of action he would adopt. Mr. President, and of course the policy recognized that. And to mitigate against these threats, firearms and or other protective gears, where necessary, would be issued under the policy in a structured and professional manner. The Office of the Commissioner of Prisons claimed that the policy was permissible because prison officers are always on duty since they could be called out at any time in an emergency. The High Court, Mr. President, disagreed with this contention that prison officers are always on duty and held that the said policy and the decision of the Commissioner of Prisons to allow keep and carry, and again those in quotations, of firearms by prison officers who are not on active duty was irrational, illegal, and ultra-virus. I might tell you from my reading of the case, the court quite impressively identified what is to be meant by actively on duty, and the circumstances defined by the Commissioner did not embrace or were not embraced in that definition established by the court in accordance with its interpretation of the Act. The court opined that the policy conflicted with the provisions of the Firearms Act and as well the provisions of the prison rules. It was further stated that the Commissioner of Prisons was not empowered under the Act to exercise his discretion to decide who is or who is not constructively on duty to authorize the issuance of any firearm or ammunition to prison officers. Very importantly, Mr. President, the court did, however, give solid credence to the intent of the policy, quite expressly, that being to protect prison officers while off duty, given the numerous incidents of prison officers being murdered. It was noted that this was a matter for Parliament to treat with, since the Commissioner of Prisons could not validly derive any discretion to issue firearms to prison officers under any provisions of the existing Firearms Act. Mr. President, that state of affairs continued or began and continued over many years, perhaps decades, coursing through different governments, all well-intentioned, until it arose before the court in the Vishal Singh case, and the court made the pronouncements that I have just, in part, rehearsed. Mr. President, I do not wish to go further into the matter. I think enough has been said upon that. But the ramifications of this decision has undoubtedly impacted on the personal safety of at-risk prison officers who would have benefited from that policy, since certain officers who were issued with firearm and ammunition would have been required to stand down, to return same, and the threats of their lives, on their lives, persists. As a matter of fact, I can tell you, based on information raised with me only very recently, very recently, the police and prison officials had to come to the theater of threat to deal with an imminent one against one of the officers. So the threat continues. Mr. President, I need not remind this honorable and distinguished gathering, this House, because the newspapers, as they are wont to do, would have over many years with emblazoned headlines, identified, shared with the national community and the world, a number of cases where prison officers lost their lives. One headline, Trinidad and Tobago Guardian, by Rosemary Sant, October the 4th, 2018, 22 prisoners, the headline said, killed in 28 years. And there are a whole number of other stories. December 2001, as far back as that, a prison officer aged 32 shot dead in Cascade. In another case, 2003, another prison officer shot dead in Laventille. In 2010, another shot dead in Laventille. One in Aruca. One prison officer strangled in Gasparillo. And so the very sad story went on. Pointe-à-Pierre, Mova, Diego Martin, all over the place. And by virtue of this office as Minister of National Security, in even a previous dispensation between the years 2002 and 2007, where I had direct responsibility as Minister in the Ministry of National Security for the prison at that time, I recall most pellucidly, if you like, many concerns and complaints and problems and fears expressed by officers in this regard. Officers of all ranks, superintendents have been taken down. And of course, that has a very demoralizing effect on the prison service, because in some cases, while we know that there are prison officers who have acted quite improperly, some have even broken the law and have had to be arrested by the police, in many cases reported by their own colleagues in the prison service, detained by their own colleagues until police reach, all of that. But there are some of the officers who would have lost their lives, for whom the only crime or allegation against them would have been the upstanding pursuit of their oaths and the proper carrying out of their lawful duty. Mr. President, nothing less, nothing more than to have stood up in accordance with their oaths. And prisoners and others feel that they must pay for doing their duty. So you can well imagine how this affects the prison organization, the service, how this affects the family members of those who would have been attacked and who would have lost lives, including children. And of course, Mr. President, that has a very, very numbing effect on the entire society. Because when you see those who are sworn and paid and uniformed to protect the society coming under attack, that makes the ordinary citizen, the civilian, feel particularly vulnerable and troubled, justifiably so. And Mr. President, a society must fight back. And I've come here today as Minister of National Security, moving these measures, asking for this Parliament's support in our legislative fight back, for that is all this House can do. And thereafter, it is up to those who will implement this legislation to ensure that it is properly implemented and effected. And of course, it also carries with it a role for the national community, every stakeholder, every citizen, to be vigilant, to be watchful, to stand for what is right. It was Archbishop Jason Gordon who told us in his New Year address recently, as far as he's concerned, and I subscribe to that, too many of us in this society do not stand on the side of righteousness as opposed to wrongiousness. Not enough of us are committed to truth and justice. We see people who are known miscreants, criminals, wanted here, there, and everywhere, coming together, holding hands for ulterior political and other purposes. But, Mr. President, we as a society, the law-abiding in the society, the right-thinking persons in the society, who we represent in this House, appointed as we are and elected as I am, we have a duty to gather ourselves together in the Constitution and in the law and to fight back against those who do this kind of thing to all of us. None is safe None is beyond their reach, as this society, our history, and many other societies of the world have demonstrated. Mr. President, prison officers in the execution of their duties are often the recipients of deadly threats from inmates. The prison environment, as you would imagine, Mr. President, is one of volatility, which often manifests serious tensions between inmates and those who are paid by us in this society to keep them in order, in accordance with the orders of the court. There are many variables that can be attributable to this tension. However, the lengthy time for judicial processes to take effect in our country, very unfortunately and too often, has been asserted as the main cause of some of these tensions. I heard the prison association's spokespersons actually say, based on information coming from some of the inmates, there's a tremendous level of frustration on the part of inmates and on the part of the society as a whole when these processes take as long as they unfortunately do. But I am able to say, as a matter of fact, that there are many things that have been done in the last few years in this country and are being done as we speak. I mean, as we speak, in an attempt to quicken the pace of justice. And if that is achieved, it therefore reduces the tensions that it contributes to, and I am particularly happy about that. It is not uncommon in our society, unfortunately, for a murder case to take 10 years to make its way through the judicial system. And I can elucidate as to the many things that have been done and are being done to quicken this process, but I'll leave that for another time, or if I have a specific request, I should do so at a later stage in this debate. Mr. President, most of the inmates charged for murder are known gang members who have quite some influence, unfortunately, in their respective communities and in some cases across the country. Serious influence. You would be amazed. Prison officers are often seen by inmates as oppressors when carrying out their respective lawful duties, which sometimes often entails, searching and confiscating contraband items and maintaining order in the prison environment. It ain't no tea party in there, you know. The people who go in there are people who would have gone in there alleged to have committed nasty crimes on the outside. No regards for human persons, no regards for the law, no regards for the mother, the father, the neighbor, elders, women, children. They're rude. And when they get in there, and these officers who we pay to protect us, in keeping them in accordance with court orders, they see them as oppressors, they issue serious threats and carry them out from time to time. Mr. President, the jailhouse economy, to which I recently made reference, is real. And it is no small economy. It is measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars. Big businesses are run from inside the jail, through their friends, through illegal communications. And it's an ongoing battle, not only in our prisons, in all prisons of the world, if we be broad-minded and open and honest, in terms of dealing with these illegal communications, some of which has to do with calling shots on the outside. Get this one dead, get the other one dead. And as a result of that possibility and that reality and the fear that it generates in people, there are victims, businessmen and others outside. They get a message to pay extortion money and it pay. And it gone in a bank account. It gone in a mattress, below a mattress under a bed. And there are prisoners who come out of the jail to meet cars, businesses, property, and plenty money. and more influence. And so the story goes. And the beast is getting bigger and fatter by the hour. And it is our duty as parliamentarians to do whatever we can to lighten this society's burden in this regard. And this measure today, these measures are designed to achieve just that. During the period January 2021 to December 22, it has been reported to me that 88 prison officers have reported being threatened by inmates. Statistical data from the Office of the Commissioner of Prisons revealed also that 16 prison officers were murdered over the last 10 years alone, all allegedly based on police reports after investigation ordered hits from behind the walls. Mr. President, as I indicated a while ago, illegal communications are a very critical part of that. The state has invested money and intellect and technologies to deal with this problem. It had limited, or well, let me not say limited, it had some measure of impact. But of course, technology being what it is, things have changed and circumstances, so it continues. And I give you the assurance, Mr. President, that the state is at the moment continuing its efforts to ensure that these illegal communications are a thing of the past. And I say with confidence, we continue that struggle. We also have the issue of prison officers allowing themselves rather feebly, weakly, unlawfully, shamefully to become mules. Some allegedly out of fear and some out of sheer complicity, because the jailhouse economy generates, as I told you, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Plenty money. A cigarette sells in there for $100 at a pop. And a phone call could be that too, $100. Many mothers outside the prison and girlfriends and aunts spend a lot of money. One mother complained to me, regularly the son, you want $1,000 on a phone card, $1,000 on a phone card. Or you want plenty money, go to buy in the cafeteria, which they have access to. They have like a cafe where they could buy things they need inside of there. And only after a while she discovered that a lot of that money was being used for other reasons, based on things that came to her knowledge. So, Mr. President, these are the kinds of factual scenarios that we find ourselves having to deal with. We do have, of course, official telephones which inmates can use and do use to communicate with their relatives. But there are those who want to communicate outside of that system. Hence the need for illegal communications. And that, as I said, is not unique to Trinidad and Tobago's prisons, and the struggle to deal with that continues. The prison service has also taken proactive approaches to reducing conflict between inmates and staff, which results in many attempts to harm prison officers. Programs have been introduced among our remanded inmates, such as needs programming, aimed at reducing institutional risk among remanded inmates. The needs program includes spiritual religious programs, anger management, adult literacy, education programming, sports and cultural programs. There was a time when these things were not available to remand inmates, but today they are. And this is only a small sample of what is available to those who are incarcerated. Many young people go inside of there and come out with 5 and 6 and Cape passes, degrees, skills in radio presentations, broadcasting, skills in upholstery, animal husbandry, in all kinds of skills, all kinds of disciplines are available to inmates in the prison. Some of them even receive stipends just as they would have on the outside in some of the training programs that are available to them. So for those who think that this is only about lock and key and turnkey, and since 2001, this government adopted a restorative approach to justice as opposed to punitive or retributive posture, and therefore these programs fall smack bang inside of that. In terms of legislation, we have passed and we have since reviewed the Interception of Communications Act, Chapter 1508, which was passed by this Parliament to make it illegal for these illegal communications, which may be harmful to prison staff. We also passed the Miscellaneous Provisions Law Enforcement Officers Act number 25 of 2019, which was passed to expand the offenses and to increase punishments to prison officers or persons who were found guilty of offenses against prison staff and prison staff who were willfully negligent in the execution of their duties. I don't have to elucidate on that. Those are laws that have been passed and deemed to be known with perfection by all my colleagues in this House. So we have done what we had to do in terms of legislation. In light of the court's ruling in Vishal Singh, and as well the high incidence of murders of prison officers, Clause 8 of this bill will introduce Section 8A, which seeks to empower the Commissioner of Prisons to grant a prison officer the permission to have in his possession a firearm or ammunition outside of the prison environment while off duty in circumstances where the Commissioner of Prisons considers that his life is under threat. This proposed amendment makes it a quicker and an easier way to solve an immediate problem. The incident I told you about last week, the prison officer himself was unaware of the threat, but it came to the attention of law enforcement. And it was through the commissioner that action had to be taken to protect him. He was completely oblivious. And in those circumstances, you can't expect him to now go and make an application for a firearm user's license. He has to get the forms online or whatever. He completes them, and there's a whole process, by which time he might well be in trouble. And therefore, this measure allows the prison commissioner to respond with promptitude. 1 o'clock in the morning if necessary. And that is the advantage of this, Mr. President. Furthermore, not all prison officers may be able to afford the $8,000 or $9,000 or $10,000 to purchase a firearm, because that has become big business in the world, and not the least in Trinidad and Tobago, generating a lot of activity and a lot of money. But that's a separate matter. And therefore, because a prison officer cannot afford to buy one if he gets himself a firearm user's license, doesn't mean that he doesn't need protection. And therefore, this Clause 8 is designed to be able to protect all comers when the prison commissioner comes to the position that he has come to. So let me, Mr. President, read with specificity and accuracy the clause that is being proposed in this regard. Clause 8A, subclause 1, says, subject to subsection 2, a prison officer may have in his possession any firearm or ammunition which is the property of the government. That is stressed because it means not talking about his private one, and it ain't talking about an illegal one. It is talking about one that is the property of the government. Subsection 2 says the Commissioner of Prisons may grant permission to a prison officer to have in his possession any firearm or ammunition which is the property of the government while off duty where he considers life or safety of the officer is under threat. Subclause 3, where the Commissioner of Prisons grants permission to a prison officer to have in his possession any firearm or ammunition which is the property of the government under subsection 2, he shall issue the prison officer a Trinidad and Tobago Services firearm identification card. This card will allow the holder to show it to a police officer so that the police officer would become aware that he is lawfully in possession of this, though it is not the usual FUL for the reasons I've stated. This card is necessary because at the moment, a firearm user's license currently in paper-based form, a little booklet for those who will know, I'm so advised, can be impractical for firearm holders to carry around on a daily basis and can easily become damaged and have become damaged. As such, this bill seeks to introduce a firearm user identification card, which is likely to be similar in size and nature, expected to be similar in size and nature to national ID cards and driver's permits, which will present a practical and convenient means of identifying and certifying that the holder of a firearm is appropriately licensed to carry same. The use of the card will also allow for the use of the card will also allow for the use of more modern security features on the card, which are not presently available in the current licensing regime with that booklet, which the records show have been tampered with, picture change, all kinds of little things, page tear out, all sorts of things, Mr. President. And this card, which this bill invites this Parliament to approve, will allow for an improvement in that to a better and more modern state with the security features so that the system will not be corrupted and duped as it has been in the past for the reason I've stated. Clause 4 of the bill, Mr. President, seeks to amend the definition of license under the Firearms Act to also include, therefore, the firearm user identification card. Additionally, Clause 11 of the bill seeks to amend Regulation 6.1 of the Firearms Regulations to provide for the form of the firearm user's license, one of which is a firearm user identification card that would contain particulars pertaining to the holder of the firearm and ammunition. And this card would contain matters such as the firearm user's license number, the name and address of the holder of the license, a photograph of the holder of the license, such electronic security features as the Commissioner of Police may determine, such further particulars as may be stated on the firearm user's license as Commissioner of Police may determine, and any other conditions which the Commissioner of Police may determine. The municipal police, to whom I made earlier reference, are often charged, in fact, I think always charged, with duties that are familiar to us, having been traditionally performed by the regular Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. They're very much involved in the law enforcement business. And they have also the mandate to keep peace and order within the municipalities that they serve. Certain operational capabilities which are carried out by the TTPS ought reasonably to extend to municipal police officers in furtherance of carrying out their very serious duties and responsibilities. The TTPS, as part of its transformation and modernization, has recently revamped its use of force policy to include the use of non-lethal weapons, which includes taser guns and pepper spray, so that the use of these non-lethal items graduated up as the circumstance, as the response requires, is very important. No longer does the police officer have to go for his gun to deal with a knife threat, or a man with a powerful man or person of insane bent or some such thing. The use of these non-lethal applications allows much more, and therefore the revamped use of force policy takes these into account. And as I indicated earlier, municipal police function largely in the same environment. As for pepper spray, before I proceed, let me say for any unwary minds or souls outside of this chamber that might be listening, this is already up and running, available to distributors, to importers, and to members of the public. And in fact, in all those categories, persons have applied to the Commissioner of Police as the law requires. So the pepper spray regime is on course. Clause 4 of this bill would amend the definition of prohibited weapon under Section 2 of the Act to include weapons which are designed or manufactured or adapted for the discharge of any noxious liquid, gas, or other thing. This definition thus encompasses tasers, which are designed or manufactured to discharge electrical energy. Furthermore, Clause 5 of this bill would amend Section 6 of the Act by introducing a new Section 6(2)(b), which would allow municipal police officers to have in their possession a taser or pepper spray for the purpose of performing his functions as a municipal police officer. The main roles and functions of the Strategic Services Agency are outlined in Section 6 of the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506. Again, it is deemed to be known by all.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you very warmly, Mr. President. It is not surprising, based on these roles and functions and responsibilities, that some of these SSA officers, undercover and covert as they are supposed to be, are often to find themselves in situations where their lives may be at risk in the course of the performance of their duty. I did say recently that reports had come to me that they were there doing their work in a particular theater of conflict or threat and risk, and shots were fired, and some of these undercover people had to scamper like everyone else to safety. But of course, it could be a situation where they're in a car. Police officers have reported sitting in a car conducting surveillance exercises, and because they were seen by somebody not knowing what they were doing and all of that, they were actually approached by gunmen. Who is you? What are you doing here? Move out of the area. Get out of here. Police officers have had to encounter that. SSA personnel will encounter this. And therefore, Clause 6 of this bill will amend Section 7 of the Act by deleting and replacing paragraph 7(1)(a) with a new paragraph. The new paragraph makes it clear that only persons in the performance of their duty and whose firearms and ammunition have been provided by the government are exempt from holding a firearm user's license for the said firearm. Mr. President, the amendment will allow the director of the SSA and any employee of that agency as designated by him to have in their possession government-issued firearms and/or ammunition during the course of performing their duties under the Act at Section 7(1)(a). Mr. President, Clause 7 seeks to repeal the current Section 8 of the Act and replace it with a new section which provides for an expansion of the persons who are now exempt from liability for carrying firearms or ammunition in a public place. The effect of this is that more persons, including the Director, Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center, because sometimes by virtue of their work, they have to move around with or have in their possession firearms. Any scientific officer designated by the Director of the Forensic Science Center, customs officers and prison officers, in each case acting in the capacity as such in the performance of their duties, will be allowed to carry firearms or ammunition in public instead of only police officers and members of the defense force, which the current Act contemplates and allows as being exempt. So we are now broadening the category of persons who will be so exempt, Mr. President. The Director of the SSA and any employee designated by him would also be exempt from having needing licenses for the prohibition of having firearm or ammunition in their possession. So, that would be, Mr. President, that would be the end of all of my speaking time, or do I?
Finish at 2:49.
I finish at 2:49. And therefore, Mr. President, I would like the clauses that I had the occasion to elucidate, as I might have done upon, I would like to commend these measures to my colleagues in this House. Clause 11, just in closing, Clause 11 seeks to amend Regulation 20 of the Act to delete the word president and substitute the word minister in order to be consistent with similar amendments included in Act number 10 of 2019, the Firearms Amendment Act, which was previously inadvertently amended. So we passed in this House Act number 10 of 2019, and we were supposed to have made another amendment to that. As I have just described, that was not done. We take the opportunity in Clause 11 to do that, Mr. President. And with those few words, given the time constraints that we all face from these platforms, I beg the support of all of this House, all the right-thinking citizens of Trinidad and Tobago for these measures, represented by those of us who are elected or nominated to be here, appointed and are here. I crave all of our support and commend these measures accordingly. I beg to move.